Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Chicanery. We are your hosts. I am Danny, and of course, the wonderful JT.
Hello.
And it was the Miami Grand Prix weekend, this past weekend. And, we've talked about it a bit before in other shows, but certainly among the American stretch of races. I guess you could call it that since there's so many of them at this point. Miami is very comfortably the least favorite of ours, so much so that we think it should be replaced by Las Vegas and just call it that. But F1 hell bent on American domination. Blah 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 blah. This is all well trodden ground, so we won't circle back to that. But still a race, still an episode to record, so should probably get right into it.
Hey, folks, what's going on? It's your favorite Carl from the Victory Lane Vibes crew, taking a little bit of time out of our show here to talk to you about something that's really important. It's the month of May, which only means one thing. You guessed it, it's my birthday. Actually, that's not what I'm here to talk to you about, but keep that in mind. With it being the month of May, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, racing events in North America, heck, even the globe, takes place right in Indianapolis. That's right, I'm talking about the Indianapolis 500 taking place at the end of this month. And so there would be no better way to kick off the month leading up to one of the biggest racing events in North America than with our good friends over at Homefield Apparel. Now, if you don't know who Homefield is, they are a vintage collegiate apparel design company. They've got merchandise for over 80 collegiate sports teams, and this year they've gotten into the world of motorsports. Now, earlier this year they kicked it off with the Hendrick Motorsports collection that's still on their website. Go ahead and check it out. But this month they're launching the Indy 500 collection, and they have some stout pieces. Let me tell you, they launched it last week. I went ahead, I rushed over to the website. I got the 1969 Indy 500 trucker hat, which I had to have, of course, because I'm a trucker. They have all sorts of great pieces, great designs, and great quality. That's one of the best parts about what Homefield does, right? It's not copy and pasted. It's not some, snatched off of Google Images or anything like that. These are authentic and original designs done to the highest of quality. And the best part is they ain't gonna break the bank either. Like sometimes you get this vintage apparel from these places, you're spending $50, $60, $70. At Homefield, you're not gonna break the bank. They got a website and a mobile app you can check out. Now that website is homefieldapparel.com. You can go over there, you can view the Indy 500 collection, you can view the Hendrick Motorsports collection, you can even view all their other designs. It's all very easily laid out for you to see. They got really fast shipping too. Like I said, I just ordered that hat and it's on its way here. And hey, if you find something you like, you can actually use our code VLV24 for 15% off your first order. Again, that code is VLV24, and the website is homefieldapparel.com. They also have a mobile app in the App Store, whether it's Android or iOS. You can go and check them out. And hey, when you get it, tag us at Twitter, VLVPod. We would love to see what you got. Thank you guys so much, and enjoy the rest of the show.
And to kick things off, it is news cycle things. So a few things sort of going on in the periphery, not as much as we typically see, but still enough to be worth mention, if nothing else. So first of all, it was made official in the lead up to the Grand Prix weekend that one Mr. Adrian Newey is leaving Red Bull Racing. Um, so, granted, the press release went through great lengths to try and reinforce that it was not because of the Horner drama. However, everybody and their dog has reported that it is because of the Horner drama, and apparently that made Adrian extremely uncomfortable and he wanted out. Um, so he is leaving, and now, interestingly enough, there doesn't seem to be a traditional gardening leave, as they call it, um, which is basically it's effectively a sort of non-compete clause, which is basically you have to bugger off for, a year, 2 years, however long, before you basically go back to work in this field. I know some doctors actually deal with that. I know, so I guess a little bit of Danny Lore. My stepmom is a GP, and every time that she has moved or changed healthcare systems, she basically has to take a gardening leave for a little bit. Um, but yeah, there is none. So it sounds like he's like gone, maybe effective immediately. I know Red Bull in the statement that they published said beginning of 2025 he would be completely free. And I guess it seems like maybe the terms of this non-traditional gardening leave is overseeing the launch of the RB17 road car. And so certainly for those of you who haven't been paying attention, of course, Adrian Newey helped design the Aston Martin Valkyrie back when Aston Martin had that branding deal with Red Bull forever and a day ago. But then after that, he had the harebrained idea to design something with fewer constraints, if you want to say such a thing. Um, same vein as Valkyrie, low production, lots of F1 tech, very fast. And if you have a large enough bank balance, then well, sign on the dotted line and one will be yours. Um, but it sounds like that is sort of the gardening leave before he's free. Um, Now, even despite the rumor mill flying something fierce, he has certainly not vocalized that he's going anywhere. It seems like this is less about leaving Red Bull for another team so much as it is just, well, getting the hell out of Red Bull. Um, so it'll be interesting to see sort of how this story develops over, I guess, the remainder of this season and ostensibly into kind of the run up to preseason next year. Um, to see if he does end up signing with some place or not. Um, Adrian is a man of many talents, and he has certainly talked about wanting to, like a la Ferdinand Magellan, just he wants to sail around the world, is something he says that he wants to do. So I don't know if we've seen the last of Newey in Formula One or what, but watch the space, I guess. Um, In other news, Nico Hulkenberg is the first domino to fall with the Audi stuff. He will be joining, I think it'll still technically be Sauber in 2025, but at any rate, he's going to Sauber next year. Um, who he is replacing is unclear as of currently. Um, it is suspected it is probably Zhou Guanyu. But again, that is unclear at this present moment. Um, and no, basically, there's been no confirmation of who is in that second seat. Um, it is thought that the German connection is what has landed him here, but no confirmation of the sort as of currently. Um, but kind of an interesting thing was kind of bubbling away in the background. I think was it the Thursday or the even potentially Friday practice? But Logan Sargent might be cooked. Um, it had managed to kind of leak out, using large inverted commas there, um, that a team was seeking some special dispensation. I say that 5 times fast to allow um, Kimi Antonelli, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, to race at Monza. Now, for what it's worth noting, the FIA effectively has a Verstappen rule, which basically can't be any younger than 18 to race in Formula One. You can have all the super license points in the world, but if you're not 18, it doesn't matter. Um, and it was announced that a team was doing this. Mercedes was very quick to say, not us. Which throws kind of a bucket on the cold water of that there could be some funky driver things happening at a Mercedes. But that pretty much give amongst the Mercedes affiliated teams, of which it is just Mercedes and then Williams, well, that only leaves one other candidate. And out of that driver lineup, there's only one guy who's on the hot seat presently, and that is Sargent. So for what it's worth, at the Grand Prix weekend, James Vowles would go through great lengths to sort of quell these rumors, basically saying that Logan needs to step it up, but he is not in immediate fear of being handed a pink slip. But that being said, James also said, at least I do believe his words were, quote, not at Monza in that interview, which kind of leaves the door open for, the whole rest of the calendar. Make of that of you will.
I mean, I think it was like there was a clip that I'd seen like today of like a commentator on like some like junior formula race of some sort, and I think they like accidentally said something about like the situation and kind of like possibly leaked that he was going to get sacked and Antonelli was going to replace him. So I don't know, like it's not the first time like you had commentators like inadvertently like leak things that have not actually been released publicly yet. So I mean, it's possible. And then I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about that, or at least like Antonelli. I mean, I don't think he's actually like won anything, or he has. I don't think he has no wins or no podiums or anything like that. And then like he would essentially be jumping from like F4 to F1, and it's like I don't know. That's a bit crazy. I mean, if you want to get rid of Sargent, I mean, I guess, but there's got to be somebody else you could replace him with.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's certainly to that end, it is worth noting that, honestly, I think part of Sargent's problem is I think that he was called up too soon. Because his junior formula career, I mean, Sargent, he has some sort of latent pace. But his junior formula career, particularly F2, wasn't anything stellar. And then when Gotifi was handed his pink slip, he was called up as a result. And I think it was too soon. So I don't know. This seems like this would just be continuing kind of the vicious cycle of
It seems
drivers.
like just the problem is that the F1 ladder system is just like a mess. Like it's an absolute mess. It's a train wreck. It's terrible. And then it's like you're talking about people like granting exceptions for people's super license and stuff now. And it's like, okay, before when it was talking about like whether or not they would grant an exception for, I think it was Colton Herta, because technically he, I guess, was supposed to have enough super license points, but because like COVID happened, that kind of like screwed everything up. And they were all like, no, like full on staunchly, like, no, we are not granting any exception for him. And that's our final decision. But it's like, in this case, for a freaking somebody who's not even 18 yet, and you're like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, what?
Yeah, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I was saying, the FIA, the ladder system is irrevocably broken, is what it is. It's like you have a whole bunch of F2 winners who are sitting on the sidelines for years at a time, doing sim work, if that. It's like, I swear to you, it's, you and I have talked about this sort of off air before, but it feels like IndyCar has done more for the FIA ladder drivers than the FIA has, particularly these last about, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years.
I mean, they have, because it's like, okay, like the ladder system is broken, and like even the way the FIA awards points for like various like racing series is like broken. Like it all just like doesn't make any sense. It's like, how is it that you have people who are, they have won like Formula 2 championships and won Formula 2 races, and they're nowhere. Like they're literally nowhere in the picture. Like people who come to mind are like Teo Porcher. I mean, luckily he's recently showed up. I mean, he's in Super Formula full time, I believe. But he's also, like we've said before, if you've been watching any of the latest IndyCar races, he's showed up there, been filling in for Mo Lucas, who was unfortunately sacked. And then also Felipe Drugovich. also a former F2 champion, and really nothing has materialized for any of these people. I mean, luckily Drugovich previewing another episode that we're gonna do soon, but he's got a seat for Le Mans, so good for him. But most of the time that he spent most of his time being like a bench warmer or whatever for Aston Martin, and it's like,
Yeah, exactly, and that's just yeah, like I said, this just all feels rather icky. Um, Antonelli does not have the body of work, I think, to grant him special dispensation. Don't get me wrong, he was, wicked fast in F4, but that didn't really mean a whole lot. Um, I know, Mercedes and sort of their driver development system, I know that they're still kicking themselves for basically missing Verstappen, who is, well, from what I can tell, Toto perceives him to be kind of the biggest thorn in Mercedes' side at the moment. Certainly if you zoom out a little bit, that is very not true. 3 years of garbage cars is the biggest thorn in Mercedes' side. But that's a discussion for a different day. But F1's least favorite protagonist, well, actually, that's probably Jos Verstappen. Never mind. But certainly he's up there. Ralph Schumacher decided that it was intelligent to show his face in the wake of all of this. I don't remember what the statement is because pretty much anything, much like Jos Verstappen and Jacques Villeneuve, pretty much it all goes in one ear and out the other for me because they all kind of suck. But basically, it was to the effect of Logan sucks and needs to be sacked. Uh, but in reality, that was really a smoke screen to try and maybe pry a door or two open to get Mick back into F1, which good luck with that, buddy. Um,
I
Mick,
mean,
it,
Mick seems to be doing fine in WEC, or at least from
hmm
what I've seen, the few WEC races that have happened this year so far, it seems to be fine. So it's like, I think he's probably better off there than in F1, to be honest.
I completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think he's fine in WEC. Certainly, if, for the F1 history nerds out there, his father, Michael, got started in sports cars, driving the legendary Sauber C9. Um, so, like, for Mick to end up, or I guess another Schumacher to do sports cars, it's really not the end of the world. It's not really that big a deal.
I mean, I really don't give a damn what Ralph Schumacher has to say because he's like, I don't know, he said a bunch of like stupid ass shit in the past, and just like, it's
Yeah,
irrelevant.
no, I completely agree. I quote tweeted that thing on Friday when that thing came out that this is big big talk coming from the guy who coasted on the reputation of his brother. Don't get me wrong. Ralph had some genuine talent, but he was never as talented as Michael. Michael opened a lot of doors for him to get into Formula One in the first place, which I mean, okay, that's what you do for your little brother. Like, whatever, that's fine. I would expect nothing different. Um, But Ralph severely overstayed his welcome, and then I can't remember who it was. It was probably Eddie Jordan because really only Eddie Jordan would say something like this. But at least in regards to the way that Ralph used to carry himself outside of the car and kind of around the paddock, it was something to the effect of, you know, Ralph is basically forgets that he's the wrong Schumacher, effectively, which is a hell of a line. But it's very true. Ralph always liked to act like he was Michael, but never had the talent. Um, and it was part of the reason why, from a lot of what I've read about sort of mid 2000s F1 and sort of paddock drama, for want of a better phrase, nobody liked Ralph very much. So, yeah, I don't know. But Mick, stay at Alpine. Don't listen to your idiot uncle. And Williams, if you're gonna replace Sargent, like, fine, whatever. But not with Antonelli. Like, come on. But actually starting to get into like race proper stuff. We had a couple special liveries for Miami. Both Ferrari and the RB team unveiled special liveries. RB with this absolutely gorgeous sort of synthwave colorway thing that they did. It was so pretty. Um, RB, the team name sucks, but they are basically the only team bringing some real color to the grid this year, and I kind of love it. Well, one of the only teams. I mean, you've got the, fluorescent green of the Saubers, and I mean, to be fair, you do have the bits of color on the Ferrari. Speaking of which, all of this hype and tease for a blue Ferrari, and and again, another bit of Anorak uh, F1 history. So back in the 60s, Enzo Ferrari, he was mad at the FIA. It was about something sports car related. I can't remember. It was a regulations change that would effectively nerf his cars. He was big mad. And so as a result, he pulled out of everything FIA sanctioned that he ran. But the problem is that the Formula One team was in a championship fight that year. And so you got what was basically the North American racing team, which is basically just Ferrari F1, but make it USA. And so they ran blue Ferraris. In fact, if you go to Ferrari's color palette today, under the historical palette, you have Nart blue in reference to that car from 61, I think. No, it was later than that. I actually think it was 63 or 64. But at any rate, that's completely besides the point. And so, teasing a blue Ferrari for Miami, you're like, it's Return of Nart. And then what do we get? We get a car that looks like a Colgate tube. It's just red, but with blue bits on the front and rear wing and a couple of blue stripes in like 13 HP logos, which is like, okay, well, I guess we know how they're paying for Lewis next year. But just what a disappointment.
It
It was
was a
basically
page straight out of Alpine's book. Like they really just pulled a bait and switch. They're like, yeah, it's gonna be blue, and then revealed the car, and I'm like, what is this?
yeah, just absolute garbage. Frankly, that's what it is.
I know people were like, because I saw people on social media and they were like, oh, you actually expected the car to be blue? I was like, yes, the way
Yes.
they promoted it, yes, I absolutely expected it to be blue. Same with the Alpine. I expected the Alpine to be pink or whatever it was. They were trying to like convince people that the car was going to be, and then it turned out to be what it was.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yes, I expect the starting car to be blue. It's like, you don't have blue fire suits for a flipping red car. I just, just frustrating. Because, if the car was just, red with some blue on it, to be fair, the cars actually looked not too bad on track, in my opinion. But,
the like dozen and one HP logos are very
well,
obnoxious, but
yeah.
like,
Yeah,
did we really need that many?
Conventional logic says no, but when has Ferrari ever adhered to that? So, I don't know. But yes, but other than the bazillion HP logos, the car actually didn't look half bad on track. The blue wheel covers were very pretty. Again, a nod to the 60s Nart team, which had blue wheels. And even the bits of blue, it looked good, but it's just, with the proper expectations set, I don't think anybody would have been upset. Though, to be fair, the RB livery really did shade the Ferrari. That car was so pretty. But anyway, moving on from news cycle stuff. McLaren and Mercedes brought some pretty notable upgrades for the Miami race. McLaren, it was both new front and rear wings. The front suspension geometry was tweaked. A lot of the bodywork was pretty fundamentally different from what we had seen. And the new front brake inlets were different, as well as the winglets around them had also been tweaked. Much like what was at least supposed to be last year's Mercedes, this is under the current regulations. This is about as close to a quote B spec car as you can get. Because, of course, with the way this all works, you can't modify the monocoque like that, and that's what constitutes a true B spec car. But yes, basically a whole new car practically, which is a bit of foreshadowing, ladies and gentlemen. And as for Mercedes, the new aero vanes at the end of the floor was different. Same thing, new front and rear wing. The rear wing's lower drag. They removed some of the support structure they simplified it, I guess, more accurately for slightly lower drag. And apparently the roof geometry was tweaked slightly. Some other teams brought some stuff because like Red Bull made some tweaks where they removed a reinforcement bit on the floor. One of the reinforcement bits was removed because it was for weight saving. It was deemed to be sufficiently strong without it. And then RB and Alpine brought some tweaks of their own, but that was largely just cooling since it was hot in Miami. But that's about concludes the sort of wrap up stuff. Getting into stuff on track. To be fair, it feels like the first sort of weekend in a while where it felt like there weren't a zillion and one things going on during like practice and quali sessions. It was actually pretty quiet, mercifully. Free practice, not a whole lot. Leclerc managed to Austin Powers it in turn 16. Where he spun coming out of the that hairpin and basically right under the bridge was just parked and couldn't get it going and tried to shuffle it forwards and backwards a bit, but was unsuccessful and brought out a red flag so the car could be retrieved because he was going to cook the engine otherwise. But that was really about the extent of the drama there. Verstappen was fastest in the session, though Piastri actually ran second place in free practice, which granted its practice doesn't really mean much, but was maybe, with the benefit of hindsight, was sort of things to come in the race weekend. Sprint quali, again, Verstappen would top the session, would go fastest. Leclerc P2, Perez P3. Ricardo went P4 in sprint qualifying, making everybody wonder, has the real Daniel Ricciardo shown up? Handily out-qualified Tsunoda.
Spoiler alert, no, he has not showed up.
Yeah, we'll get to that, but no. But yes, McLaren had some real pace early in the sprint quali sessions. Lando had actually been fastest SQ1 and SQ2, but as a part of the revised sprint formats, now everybody qualifies on softs for SQ3 if you make it. And the McLaren really didn't like that at all. And as a result, plummeted down the table. It would be Piastri P6, Norris P9. The Mercedes, what can be said about this car that hasn't already been said? It's a tractor, it's a dog. I know they were doing some promotional thing with, because WhatsApp is a sponsor, the WhatsApp car is faster. I know there were some memes about that in the lead up to the Grand Prix weekend. Yeah, Russell P11, Hamilton P12. Hamilton being noted for a pit lane infringement somewhere in there. And speaking of penalties, because they were flying again this weekend, Bottas would cop a 3-place grid drop for the sprint for impeding Piastri during sprint quali. And then moving on to the sprint race, Albon would actually start from the pit lane because of, I think, tweaks made to suspension, which were done under parc fermé conditions, which is a no-no, so you start from the pits. And it means that technically it's the only time that Sargent has technically outqualified Albon. And that's kind of by default because technically he was P19, so make of that what you will. But it would get very stupid, kind of in the lead up and in the early stages of the race. Ocon would end up getting a 10-second time penalty for an unsafe release as they were letting the drivers out onto the track for the formation lap because Ocon just drove into Leclerc, which necessitated a new front wing for Ocon. Again, very stupid, but I'm happy that the plus 5 seconds meme, plus 5 second penalty for Ocon meme has made a return because that's very funny. And then the start of the race, there was basically a lap one, turn one incident with initially it was between the two Aston Martins. It was Stroll and Alonso. Had no clue quite what went on there, but as a result, Norris got forced out wide, and then Hamilton just comes out of absolutely nowhere and makes it 4 wide and just drives into the side he drove into the side of Alonso because Alonso was technically the car already on the inside, and doing that, it pushed Stroll into Norris and basically took them both out on the spot. Very, very stupid. Somehow Lewis escaped a penalty for that. Not really sure how. Like the stewards just didn't even bother to look at it, which was a little surprising. But they didn't. But the debris did bring out a safety car while they cleaned up that mess because it was all manner of shredded carbon fiber in turn one. And then Magnussen arrived. So if you're familiar, in Jeddah, K-Mag was just on demon time at Jeddah, basically to work up a robust defense to keep Hulkenberg in points range, basically playing rear gunner. You go, okay, yeah, fine, admirable enough. But the way he did it, driving off track to gain an advantage, it was all manner of nonsense. And after Jeddah, a lot of team bosses and team personnel were very angry about that. Now, it went largely ignored because most of the fervor came from the Alpine camp, and it was basically, lol, you're just mad because you're slow. And as a result, basically nothing was done about it, which in hindsight was probably a mistake. No, actually, it definitely was a mistake because he did it again. Same thing to keep, basically to keep Hulkenberg safe and to try to keep Lewis out of points contention. He same thing, cutting corners, chicanes, just the whole lot. And then the penalties started to stack a bit because originally it was a penalty for just track limits, basically going off track to gain an advantage. But then that became a penalty. Pardon me. That became a penalty for improperly serving the penalty originally, which then became a penalty for entering a closed pit lane for attempting to remedy the previous penalty. Now, it would end up not mattering because Lewis would get, ironically, he wouldn't get a penalty for just the act of terrorism he committed at the start of the sprint race, but he would get one for apparently driving too fast through the pit lane because they were taking the cars through the pits during the safety car period, and apparently he was 10 kilometers an hour too fast, which, given that he was in a line, I'm not really sure quite how he managed that. That doesn't make any sense to me, but whatever, he got a penalty. But K-Mag would get quite a sizable one. I think it ended up being I think it was a few seconds and a grid drop, is what he ended up getting. But at any rate, Ricciardo finished his newfound run of form and finished P4. Now, granted, it wouldn't last because he would then go to qualify for the actual race P18. So, I don't know they they injected him full of for sprint quali in the sprint race, but it very clearly wore off after that. But not really a whole lot of note happened in the actual normal qualifying. So little that I actually didn't bother including a section in the notes because whatever, who cares? Um, but race day would roll around, and another almost lap one, turn one incident. Perez, just like an absolute piss missile, would just roll in doing mock whatever and almost took out Verstappen, which would have made it quite amusing. Would have been a very uncomfortable conversation when everybody gets back to Milton Keynes the following day. But it would have been funny. But that, which meant that the Ferraris had to bail um, on the corner, and all of this allowed Piastri to sneak up to P3 from starting P6. And it would kind of be business as usual. Now, granted, Verstappen complained about the balance of the car. High track temp, something like 45 degrees centigrade on race day, which for those of us who don't use the metric system, that's near enough 100-degree track temperature. And so he didn't like the balance. And as a result, he did not streak off into the distance. Piastri kept him very honest. Piastri and Leclerc, I do believe it was, in P2. However, he would make a mistake. Verstappen would completely botch the chicane, I guess, turn 14, 15, turn 14A, 14B. I don't remember quite how it's delineated on the track map. But anyway, that chicane before you head up to the final corner. And he jumped the curb and he knocked a bollard onto the circuit because they're bollards because it's kind of downhill and weird. So it's just meant to be a visual reference point for where the chicane is. But however, unbeknownst to, I don't think anybody, certainly I didn't realize it until seeing a replay, he completely borked the floor of his car. And this would have quite significant ramifications for his pace. A couple laps later, the bollard basically being blown onto the racing line would bring out a very, very quick VSC that would see Ocon Magnussen, who was actually behaving himself, and Alonso pit. Verstappen after said VSC, which I mean, it may have been where he was on track when the VSC was out, but it seems wild to not pit when you basically have a free almost pit stop is weird. However, lap 27 would see Sainz and Piastri, who were basically running up front, stop, only to get completely screwed over by an actual safety car basically right after. Because Sargent and Magnussen, who had decided that behaving was not very much fun anymore, would have a coming together at turn 2, which this would see Sargent out of the race completely. He spun off into the barriers. He basically had a gigantic accident, the same place that Charles did during qualifying last year. Magnussen would limp back to the pits for repairs and then get slapped with a 10-second penalty for the move. But this safety car period would see Lando, Zhou Guanyu, Yuki, and Daniel Ricciardo would use the safety car to pit, which would then go on to end at lap 32. And this basically gave the combination of VSC and quick safety car would basically give Lando all the track position. So much so that Bernd Mailander got very confused when getting the grid to bunch up. He thought Verstappen was leading, while Lando just buggered off and threatened to basically put the whole field almost a lap down. And so had to basically go and release them to catch Lando, which was very, very funny. But safety car would end. Sainz and Piastri would have an almighty scrap for P3 with Lando leading, Verstappen in P2. With lots of elbows out and argy-bargy. all of that, kerfuffles, to quote the late great Ken Squire. Um, Signs would finally find a way past at basically the final corner at lap 37. But in doing so, locked up, and Piastri basically drove into the back of him and broke his front wing, which basically that was Piastri's day done. Now, Norris would win. Lando, after 110 Grand Prix, would finally notch a win. And he is the only driver other than Sainz to beat a Red Bull racing car in the last 2 years, which is, oh boy, that's depressing. Verstappen would come home runner-up. Leclerc in third, sorry. Ocon would actually score points this round, which was makes the first point of the Grand Prix scored, which was super duper fun. Lewis would work his way up to P6, I do believe. And Fernando and George would kind of round out the podiums. Now, it's worth noting, if you've been listening, you'll notice I omitted a certain driver, because after the race, the stewards decided that Sainz was actually an idiot and should be penalized. So for the contact with Piastri, he got a 10-second penalty, which would relegate him to P5, because he would have been P3 otherwise. It actually would have been P3 and Leclerc before. And K-Mag, for his weekend of excellence, is very, very close to a race ban. He has 10.
He's following Pierre Gasly's footsteps since last season.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, he is 10 points out of the required 12 to cop a race ban. And from what I could tell, although admittedly figuring out where the penalty points are apportioned, it's all a very opaque process. So I might go back and insert an editor's note if I find something a little bit more conclusive between the time of recording and when this episode goes out. But I do believe 6 of those were accrued this weekend alone, which is absolute insanity. Now, because of the just bender that K-Mac went on, and certainly in the racing perspective, the stewards are looking into figuring out how to more harshly and more swiftly penalize this kind of driving, because everybody is officially sick of K-Mag's shenanigans, which is fair enough. But I guess this is a second. Well, admittedly, this is a bit skewed because we did a gigantic batch recording and things are kind of all over the place a few weeks ago. So I can't remember quite the order of everything. But the last episode, the last recording session, rather, was actually the Barber episodes. I do believe it was the Imola episode that went out most recently. And, we did the start a dialogue thing. And so I guess for the second consecutive recording, although granted not as you listen to it, time and recording sessions and the way that those intermingle is very fun. And I love it when it's a bit confusing. It, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff. But yes, so at any rate, one former president, Donald Trump, was a guest of the McLaren F1 team for the race on Sunday. Photos of him with both Lando and team boss Zach Brown were basically buckshot across social media right before the start of the race on Sunday. Now, it's worth noting that Donald was up to some mess and had been categorically rejected from the race weekend. And so we kind of figured, okay, well, that's the last of him, just for him to be parading across F1 timelines and socials, in the lead up to the race. And I point this out simply because I'm sure you'll remember in 2020, The FIA made some real concerted moves to block, at least on paper, what is supposed to be this kind of thing. I'm sure you'll probably remember at the U.S. Grand Prix in 2020, to the podium ceremonies, um, Lewis wore a shirt saying, "Arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor." This was during the thick of the Black Lives Matter movements and protests that it sparked off not only across the country but across the world in 2020. Um, as a result of the murders of both George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And, Lewis was making a point, kind of as he does. But that got him summoned to the stewards as a result of that. And again, some bits of, say legally, sort of red tape were inserted into the sporting regulations after that, with the idea being to not allow this stuff. And on paper, that should include what McLaren did with having, not only a former president, but also one that has more federal indictments than JT and I have fingers and toes um, coming, and just the look that that gives the sport. But it's just the question of why, what, and sort of where's the line drawn with this kind of thing. So, at any rate, I will let you have the floor for this.
I mean, clearly the FIA doesn't really care that much, but honestly, it's just, I don't really see what Zach Brown gains from having Trump associated with the McLaren brand, like, especially at this time when it's like McLaren is already, like, kind of catching a lot of heat for, at least on the IndyCar side, for, their decision on letting go Malukas, but it's like, I don't know. They don't really gain anything from it, honestly. It's like, what do you really gain from attaching yourself, your brand, to somebody who has like 88 federal charges right now? It's like, okay, I guess you do you.
And that's the other thing. There really is nothing really, and F1 as a whole doesn't have anything to gain from this, because you have a guy with an almost triple digit amount of federal indictments. And actually, the list of just general charges actually does reach triple digit once you realize all of the local ones that he has as well in Georgia and Arizona, if I remember correctly. Um, there's nothing to gain and everything to lose having a guy like Donald Trump as a guest. As much as F1 wants to talk about making this be more inclusive spaces and safer spaces, a place that everybody, no matter who you are, you can be, either in Formula One as a driver, as a fan, blah blah blah. I mean, that was the whole point of We Race as One. But then you have a guy who, by his own admission, is one of the most I I won't say prolific abusers, frankly, but is certainly quite a high profile one. And then to have again a and it's worth noting, certainly, fair trial and guilty, until innocent until proven guilty, blah 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 blah. But like nothing good comes from having a guy like that milling about the paddock. And look, it is not to say that the guys, and certainly some of the celebrities that have floated around the paddock before have been spotless. Great example. The guy who is effectively working with Ferrari for a lot of their stuff going forward. ASAP Rocky, through his collaboration with Puma and his ad agency, or his creative agency, AWGE. Rocky is not exactly the most spotless guy either. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's got an assault charge floating over his head at the moment for some incident somewhere. But it's just, I don't know. It's the kind of the ick. And, especially, Lando ostensibly being kind of starstruck by Trump, which now, to be fair, from what I've heard about Lando, that is not entirely out of character from him. But all of this, I think it goes what was otherwise kind of a Cinderella story weekend for both Lando and McLaren. I think this taints it quite significantly. And I think is just another useless black eye on the sport, especially given that it is, heavily reported that one of the well, not one of the most successful designer and technical figure in Formula One is ostensibly bailing because the team boss is a fucking creep. Like, it is just gunshot to the foot after gunshot to the foot. And it just seems so, well, superfluous, unneeded. And it's frustrating, kind of above all else, that this kind of thing still happens with the regularity that it does, first and foremost. But the fact that, and I understand that this is a very idealist view, and certainly it doesn't take a whole lot of peeling back the layers to understand that, sport, high money sport, high profile sports, all of them are kind of scummy and scuzzy and, well, frankly, shitty to some degree. But it's almost a feeling of moving backwards. It's like, how do we do, we race as one not even 5 years ago, and then have Trump on basically hanging around the paddock. And then that nonsense line at the end, Norris trumps Verstappen. It's like, Crofty, you're not cute. It's like that line, The Rock is like, you see that off, you can take it and fuck, I do believe is the line. But it's
I mean, the rebase is one thing, kind of doesn't mean anything because I mean they still have Jos Verstappen walking around, and he's an abuser too, a very prolific one. It's like, what kind of message does that say to like women who work in Formula One?
Yeah. And that's why I said, certainly, it's a very bird's eye, it's a very idealist view. You and I could sit here. I mean, we could genuinely talk about this for the next hour and just scratch the surface. Because yes, Jos Verstappen, legendary piece of shit, father of Max Verstappen. So it's just this type of thing I find so vexing. It's so flummoxing. This is the kind of stuff. It's like, keep politics out of sport. But basically that is, when the politics are, like helpful and help make, marginalized groups more visible. That's when the politics is bad. That is what I have basically learned from all of this. But, when you've got, a guy like, Trump, who is absolutely bad for business and in such a way that it is like obvious, but no, he's fine and welcomed and accepted. 88, federal indictments. What federal indictments? That's a word that, doesn't have, well, given that, Domenicali, is Italian and is the head of F1 at the moment. That is a phrase that doesn't have an Italian translation, apparently. So, like, I don't know. It's frustrating, and this is a good kind of thing that can be incredibly demoralizing about motorsports. But I guess with that, I will we'll call and we'll wrap it there. Next round is Emilia Romagna, or Imola to you and I. That's in a couple weeks. Coming up is IMSA at Laguna Seca. And where's WEC again? I've forgotten already.
There at Spa.
That's what it is. I don't know why I didn't remember that. And Spa is one of my favorite circuits. Yeah, 'cause it's the 6 hours of Spa. Duh. Yeah, so there's, plenty more coming. It's the month of May for IndyCar, so Lord knows there will be plenty of that rolling through. And then after that will be IMSA and Indy at Detroit, which, with any luck, your girl will be boots on the ground live for that one. So we'll have to sort of see what happens. But with that, this has been another episode of Chicanery. Thank you so much for listening. We are your hosts. And until next time.